Right now, somewhere in the world, a creature is starving to death because there are simply too many mouths to feed. And nature, it turns out, has some absolutely ruthless ways of dealing with this problem, ways that make our worst nightmares look like a bad day at the office. You see, overpopulation isn't some abstract problem that only affects humans planning cities. It's a brutal, immediate, visceral crisis that plays out constantly in nature. And the methods nature uses to solve it, they're not gentle, they're not quick, and they're not something you want to experience firsthand. Let's start with what happens when a population explodes unchecked. Picture a perfect environment, plenty of food, no predators, ideal weather. A species moves in and everything seems perfect, so they breed, and breed, and breed some more. Within weeks or months, the population can multiply exponentially. Deer herds can double in a single year. Rodent colonies can go from dozens to thousands in just a few seasons. Everything feels amazing right up until the moment it doesn't. Because here's what happens next, and this is where things get dark. The food runs out, not gradually, suddenly. A deer population that's been thriving will overgraze their entire range within months. They eat every sapling, every shrub, every available plant. Within a year, they've destroyed the entire ecosystem they depend on, and now there's nothing left to eat. What follows is pure nightmare fuel. Starvation sets in, but it's not quick. Animals don't simply fall asleep and peacefully perish. They slowly waste away. Their ribs become visible through their fur. Their eyes sink into their skulls. They become weak, lethargic, and delirious. Maternal animals will abandon their young because they don't have the energy to care for them. The young starve first, watching helplessly as their parents grow weaker. In some cases, starving animals will turn to cannibalism, eating their own offspring or the corpses of their neighbors just to survive one more day. And this doesn't happen over years, it happens over weeks. But starvation is actually nature's slower solution. The faster method? Disease. When populations become dense enough, disease spreads like wildfire. A single infected individual can infect thousands. In overcrowded conditions, pathogens evolve faster, become more virulent, and jump between hosts so rapidly that immunity can't keep up. We're talking about mortality rates that can wipe out 90% of a population in a matter of days. In the 1980s, rabbits were introduced to Australia. Within 100 years, they'd multiplied to 1 billion individuals. The landscape was being destroyed, so scientists introduced a virus specifically designed to kill rabbits. The disease spread through the population like a plague. Rabbits that were healthy in the morning were dead by evening. Within months, the population collapsed by 90%. But here's the thing, the virus didn't stop there. It kept spreading, kept evolving, and kept killing until the rabbit population was reduced from billions to millions. Then there's the third method. Predation intensifies. When prey populations skyrocket, predators show up, and they show up fast. Wolves follow elk herds, hawks follow rodent explosions, snakes follow frog populations. For a brief, shining moment, the predators feast like kings. They breed, they thrive. Their populations explode too. But it's a trap, because once the predators have decimated the prey population, suddenly the predators are starving. They turn on each other. They fight for the last remaining scraps. Infanticide becomes common. Stronger individuals kill weaker ones just to reduce competition for food. The predator population crashes just as hard as the prey population did, and the cycle begins again. But the absolute most brutal solution, behavioral collapse. When animal populations become too dense, something breaks in their behavior. Mice in overcrowded conditions will attack each other without provocation. Apes will murder their own group members. Birds will peck each other to death in fights over nothing. Scientists call this phenomenon the death wish. Animals essentially give up the will to survive because they're so stressed by constant proximity to others. In studies of overcrowded mouse colonies, researchers observed something haunting. The mice would gather in the center of their enclosure, stacked on top of each other, hundreds of them, not eating, not drinking, just sitting in complete stillness until they died. They called these groups the beautiful ones, and they would remain perfectly still until they starved. The famous researcher John Calhoun conducted an experiment called Universe 25, where he created the perfect mouse utopia: unlimited food, unlimited water, thousands of nesting boxes, no predators, no disease. Everything a mouse could want. The population exploded to around 2,200 individuals. But then something shifted. The males began ignoring females. Females began attacking their own young. Aggression escalated, cannibalism spread, and then came what Calhoun called the withdrawal phase. Mice stopped interacting altogether. They stopped reproducing. Some of them simply sat grooming themselves obsessively until their fur wore away. It was a complete social collapse. Within 4 generations, the population had completely died out, even though food and water remained available until the very end. This is what nature's solution to overpopulation actually looks like. Not some distant future threat, but a present-day catastrophe that's happening right now in nature. Species constantly bump up against these limits, and when they do, they don't gradually decline, they crash. The question becomes, why haven't humans experienced this? Well, we actually have. We call them famines, plagues, and wars. But humans have one thing most animals don't. We can innovate our way out of these traps. We've developed agriculture, medicine, sanitation, and systems of trade that let us support populations far beyond what any ecosystem naturally could. For now. But that same capacity for innovation that saved us also means we keep pushing our population higher and higher, and every time we hit a limit, we innovate our way past it. The problem is that those limits are getting harder to bypass, and the innovations are getting more controversial. The brutal reality is that nature has only ever solved overpopulation one way: by reducing the population, sometimes slowly through starvation, sometimes quickly through disease, sometimes violently through predation and cannibalism, and sometimes, most disturbingly, through the complete psychological collapse of the species itself. We've managed to avoid these fates through technology and cooperation, but that solution only works as long as we keep choosing cooperation and as long as our technology keeps advancing. The moment either of those breaks down, nature's brutal solution becomes our problem again, and that's what's so terrifying about overpopulation. It's not some abstract future threat. It's a force as old as life itself, and we're only ever one disaster away from relearning exactly how brutal nature's solution truly is.